As much as I love the traditional red and pink for Valentine's Day, I really love creating neutral pieces to balance everything out. Hey everyone, welcome back to Glue La La. My name's Jess, and I love making home decor on a budget, and if you do too, then let's get started. One of the great things about the Dollar Tree are the variety of sizes and shapes of hearts that they put out every year for Valentine's Day. So I went through my stash. Some of these are new from this year, some are from last year, and I picked out 4 hearts that I really liked and that I thought would look really well together as a grouping. I started by removing all of the tags and stickers off of all the pieces that I had, and then I took a little tub of the spackle that they have at the Dollar Tree and I used that to fill in the holes at the top of this big heart. I also used it to fill in the little hole on this tiny wooden heart as well. To give the hearts a pretty cohesive look, I decided to paint them with the plaster color by Waverly. Now this green conversation heart, I knew I was going to cover up the front of it with something else, so I mainly concentrated the paint around the edges to cover up the green. And I did run a little paint on the front just to make sure that none of that green showed through. I also added the plaster color to the really large heart, and then the smaller, chunkier wooden heart got a coat of the plaster color as well. The little wooden ornament, I knew I wanted to paint a different color, and I'll show you that in a second. After the paint had dried on the largest of the hearts, I took the mineral color by Waverly and I gave that smaller ornament one coat of that, and then I used that same color and I distressed the larger heart using a dry brush technique. After my paint was all dried, I hot glued the smaller wooden ornament to the center of the chunkier heart. I'm using one of the self-adhesive wall tiles that they sell at the Dollar Tree to cover up the front of the conversation heart. Now you can see here, I already put a couple pieces of double-sided tape on top of the conversation heart because I wasn't sure how strong the adhesive was on the back of the wall tiles. So I added that in just for more security. So then I laid the tile as best as I could on the heart, and because this had lines running through it, I wanted to try to make sure that the lines in this tile stayed fairly vertical on the heart, but I just eyeballed it. Then once I had the tile stuck down to the front of the heart, I just used my scissors to cut around the edge of the tile. Now I was ready to start stacking my hearts. So I'm holding the hearts upright so that I could see it better. And I wanted to make sure that the points of the bottoms of the hearts would both be laying flat on the surface, because I was hoping that this would stand up on its own, and it did, as you can see there. So I lined up the first heart, I offset it on the bigger heart, and then I added hot glue to the back and stuck it down. And then the chunkier heart I laid on top of both of them, and I offset it until I liked how it looked, and then I did the same thing. I added some hot glue just where I knew it would stick to that center heart. And then I was afraid that there wasn't enough support underneath that chunky heart, so I took 2 of the tumbling tower blocks and I hot glued those together, and that wasn't quite enough to slip underneath there. So then I added a piece of craft stick to the top of those, and I was able to get that inside there and hot glue it into place just to act as an extra support. As a final embellishment for this project, I decided to take some jute twine, and I started by hot gluing it to the back of the whole thing, and then I wrapped it around several times so that it crossed over itself to create a little X on the front of the hearts. Now, one thing I'll say, because the hearts have that curvature to them on the sides, after I had the jute in place how I liked it, I went back through and I hot glued as close as I could to the edges of all of the hearts as well, just to make sure that those jute strings stayed in place. Dollar Tree always carries these decorative trays, and sometimes they have the little nubby pieces on the end, sometimes they're just a smooth tray, but I had this one in my stash that had the little dots running around the outside of it, and I like that design element it adds, so I gave this tray 3 coats of the Plaster Color by Waverly. The reason I did 3 coats is obviously 1 coat wasn't enough to cover everything up, and after I did the 2nd coat I could still see some brush strokes, so I decided to add the 3rd coat just to smooth it out as much as I could. Now if the weather was a little better, I probably would have just taken it outside and spray painted it, but it's a little too cold for that now. I love these little wooden hearts they have at the Dollar Tree right now, and I especially love these ones because they have the mini hearts inside the bigger heart. So I wasn't sure if I wanted to paint these or if I wanted to stain them, so I decided to go somewhere in between. And I mixed the antique wax with a little bit of the ink color chalk paint to give myself a really dark stain. Now I'm using gloves when I put this on because I really wanted to make sure that I got inside all of the openings on these hearts, and I knew that it would just make a big mess. So after I had added a coat of my wax and paint mixture to the heart, I wiped it off with a wet wipe to get the excess off and to show the wood grain. I wanted to create a bow for in the corner of my tray, so I took this black and white striped ribbon that I had on hand. I think I got this from Walmart, and I started by just folding over a loop to the width that I wanted my bow, and then because this ribbon's wired, I took another length of it and I cut the wire off of each end, and that's what I'm going to use to tie around the center of my bow. Once I had the center of my bow cinched together, I used one of those wires that I had cut off of that other piece, and that's what I used to hold everything in place. And then all I had to do was take that piece that didn't have the wires on it anymore, and I just tied it around the center, and I made sure that the knot was in the back. Instead of adding tails to my bow, I decided to glue some greenery to the corner of the tray and kind of fan it out where the tails of the bow would normally fall. I kind of laid one piece down going in one direction in the corner and one in the other. And then once I had my bow hot glued on top of the 2 pieces of greenery, I took just a little tiny piece of greenery and tucked it in to make sure you couldn't see any of the hot glue. The last thing I had to do was hot glue my hearts into place, so I laid them out and spaced them out evenly, and I started with the bottom heart and hot glued that one on first, and then I moved to the top heart and I hot glued that one down, and then that way I was able to judge better where I needed to place that center heart. Now, if you're not really into neutrals for Valentine's Day, I think painting these wooden hearts a bright red or a bright pink would look really pretty, or you could change out the bow that you put at the top of the tray to something that has more pinks or more reds in it. I would really love it if you gave this video a thumbs up, and make sure you're subscribed if you haven't already, and come follow me on Instagram. I try to post there every day, and that way you and I can get to know each other. Another thing I always love to get at the Dollar Tree at Valentine's Day are their heart-shaped doilies. These are paper doilies, and they're great for adding a little extra decoration to your tablescapes, or they're great to use as a stencil too. And so that's what I decided to do with these. So I just grabbed one of the doilies. Sometimes they stick together, and that's okay, but we just need one for this project. And I have this 8x8 canvas on hand. If you don't have an 8x8, they do sell 8x10 canvases at the Dollar Tree. So I took the Mineral Color by Waverly and a sponge pouncer brush. I'm not sure what they're called. They're for stenciling. They're like a foam brush, but they have a flat end to them. So all I did was dip it in the paint color, dab off some of the excess, and then start dabbing around the edges of the doily. I didn't use anything to hold it in place. I just kind of held it in the center, and it went on fine. And I made sure that as I was pouncing, I was going towards the outside of the doily too, so that some of the paint went around the outside of the heart. And then once you lifted it up, you can see that the pattern's there from the doily. I didn't care for how there was just a large blank space in the center of the doily, and I had these wooden hearts on hand from the Dollar Tree, and I realized that this heart that was sort of elongated fit perfectly in there. So to keep it coordinated, I gave this heart one coat of the Mineral Color also. After everything was dry, all I had to do was hot glue the heart to the center of the print. And then I decided to keep mine pretty simple. I didn't add any bows or anything, but I didn't care for the hole that was still left at the top of the heart. I thought it would blend in enough that I wouldn't have to worry about covering it up, but I decided instead of a bow, I would just take a piece of this ribbon from the Dollar Tree and just tie a simple knot in the center and then dovetail the two ends. And this is where you could be creative and make this fit your own style. I think that instead of using a neutral color like the mineral, if you stenciled the doily on with some red or painted the heart red, it would add a really pretty pop of color to your decorations. I used the same ribbon to create a hanger for my picture, so I used my ruler and I measured down about 3 inches on each side, and I added a dab of hot glue just to the top corner of the frame, so that way there was a little tail hanging down, and I did that on both sides so that it would be even, and then I made sure to dovetail both ends of the ribbon as well. When I'm creating pieces for Valentine's Day, sometimes I like to make things that can transition right from Valentine's Day into spring. So I decided to make a wreath, and they have these willow wreath forms at the Dollar Tree. This is a 12-inch one. I know I've seen smaller ones there before too. I gathered up a few pieces of wooden hearts that I had on hand. This one is one of the ornaments that come in the packs, and then the little ones I have actually came in a pack all together. So I ran a piece of jute cord through the center of the hole of the ornament, and then I sandwiched 2 of the smaller hearts on one end of the jute cord, and then I cut a piece off and I sandwiched the bigger of the smaller hearts on the other end of the jute cord. I wanted the one heart in the back to hang slightly lower than the front heart, so I played around till I liked how it looked, and then I added a dab of hot glue to the back just so that that would stay in place and those hearts could still hang freely, but one would always be slightly longer. After that was glued in place, I took another length of jute cord and I ran it through the top of the hole, and then that was what I was going to use to tie to the center of the wreath form. I laid the hearts down in the center of the wreath till I liked how far down they hung, and then I just tied that jute around the wreath form itself. Once I had it where I liked it, because this wreath form was a little oddly shaped, so I had to find the best spot for it, and then I just added a little hot glue to make sure that that jute cord wasn't going to slide around to another part of the wreath. The lamb's ear that they sell at Walmart usually has 2 stems in it, so I took them and I trimmed them down slightly and I curved them so they would fit the top of the wreath. Then I just used another piece of jute twine and I fished it through some of the branches on the wreath and the branches of the lamb's ear, and I tied it together to hold it in place. I created a larger bow the same way I did earlier on that tray, except this time I did 2 layers of loops and I added a set of tails. And I used this burlap ribbon that I had, and then I just hot glued it to the top of the wreath. I think these little wooden cutting boards at the Dollar Tree are so cute, and I like how it is, but I decided to give it a Valentine's twist. So I left the design on the front the way it was because there was no sticker on the back of this. I figured it'd be pretty easy to paint. I covered it with 1 coat of the plaster color, and I didn't mind if there were a few little pieces of the wood showing through because I was going to distress it anyway. I could have just used a piece of sandpaper and sanded around the edges and across the surface a little to distress it, but since I was already using the mineral color a lot in these projects, I decided to continue with the same theme so that everything would look coordinated, and I just dry brushed over the surface of the cutting board. I created a little decal for my cutting board in Cricut Design Space. I just searched the phrase "Kiss the Cook" and this showed up. So I cut it out with my Cricut and I put it on the front of the cutting board. Now if you don't have a Cricut, I did design a printable that I will have linked in the description box. The only thing I would suggest is if you're going to Mod Podge this on, I would skip the distressing, Mod Podge the printable on first, and then distress over it. So the last thing I wanted to do is create an embellishment for the top of the cutting board, and instead of doing just a traditional bow, I decided to cut 2 lengths of ribbon, and I dovetailed each end and I laid them in an X pattern, and then I tied them in the center with a piece of twine. After I hot glued that to the top of my cutting board, I had these little wooden cutouts from the Dollar Tree, and there was this really cute set of lips available, so I hot glued that right to the center of the bow. Thanks for hanging out in the craft room with me today. I left some videos on the screen that I think you might like. Have a great week, and I'll talk to you in the next one.